One of the experiences as a Bible teacher that I will remember to the end of my days happened on the island of Pentecost. Pentecost is part of Vanuatu. Vanuatu is a nation southeast of the Solomon Islands in the Pacific Ocean. I was visiting for a camp meeting, a district meeting for 5 days, sleeping in the hut of the chief and speaking to the people about many different areas. There were 2 cars on the island, 1 telephone. People had arrived for the district meetings, walking, bringing their machetes to have food as they went along. They were not literate people to a large degree. And at one meeting, when we opened for questions, a lady asked me a question about a particular story in the Gospel of Mark. And she asked me, why didn't Jesus heal this blind man immediately? Let's read the story. It's from Mark chapter 8, verse 22. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hand on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't go into the village." Now, the question is legitimate. Why didn't Jesus heal him at once? After all, he healed the demon-possessed daughter of the Syrophoenician woman just by saying so. Here it took some time. There are several stages. And the question why is natural. I, back at Pentecost, at the small village of Pandas, pondered upon how to explain it, and I went straight out into it and explained the literary aspect, the aspect of the narrative. Jesus healed this way, and Mark told it in order to illustrate for the disciples that now and then it takes time for us to come to understanding. And you see, that lady understood it immediately, because she may not have been a learned intellectual, but she had grown up with narratives that illustrate the theological points. She had grown up in a narrative culture. So here you have it. This chapter, this section, has much to do with the understanding of the disciples, and it took time. This understanding is well illustrated by the following episode, one of the most famous dialogues in the New Testament. We read from verse 27. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Christ." And Jesus warned him and them not to tell anyone about him. Now, there are many interesting aspects of this dialogue. It is enlarged in some of the other Gospels, but the main point is clear. Peter confesses that Jesus is the Messiah. Christ means Messiah. He's the Son of God. What is interesting is that this has been a secret so far. The evil spirits have not been allowed to proclaim it. Now, as many secrets, the great things about secrets is that somebody knows. From the very beginning, you and I, the readers of the Gospel of Mark, we know, because we are told, this is the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus, the Son of God. And then we realize as we read along that the Father in heaven knows. At the baptism of Jesus, he proclaims, "This is my Son, the beloved." And then, what a paradox, we realize that the evil spirits, the demons, also know who Jesus is. And Jesus commands them to keep quiet. But throughout the first part of the gospel, people are asking the question. The question, it pops up every now and then. Who is he? Who is this person? Even the storm and the sea obey him. Who is he? Now finally, some ordinary human beings, that is Peter and the disciples, confess and proclaim Jesus is the Christ. He is Messiah. And suddenly, you and I as readers share the identity with the disciples because we share the secret. Notice how important it is for the fellowship, for the community of people, when they share secrets. Do we want to hear a secret? And if I entrust you with one of my secrets, we share something that nobody else knows about. So now in the story of Mark, you and I as readers, we share the secret with the disciples. How wonderful. And then let's move to what follows next in the story. Because just after the confession of Peter, Jesus begins to teach them that the Son of Man, a name for himself, must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. This is the first of 3 instances where Jesus predicts his death on the cross and the resurrection. He predicts his suffering. And all these 3 instances you will find in these chapters from chapter 8, verse 27, and to the end of chapter 10. These 3 chapters, or 2.5 chapters, where you and I as readers share with the disciples the secret, and where the focus is on how can Jesus help us as disciples to understand what it is all about. Because when Jesus predicts his suffering, we read, he spoke plainly about this, that is not in parables anymore, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of man." This is quite a different way of speaking to Peter. Just before, Peter was the one who spoke on behalf of the best of everyone. You are Christ. And now Jesus turns to him and says, "Get behind me, Satan." What's it about? And here's the point. Now the disciples now know the secret. They know who Jesus is, but they don't know and understand yet what he is. They don't understand the implications. They know that he is Messiah, but their concept of what Messiahship means is completely different from the one Jesus has. The Messiah in Jesus' words and thinking is a Messiah who will suffer, who will serve. And as you read on, there are several exciting episodes, but as we have a lot to cover, I will move on to the second prediction of the suffering. We find that in verse 30 in chapter 9. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were, because he was teaching his disciples. It's all about teaching the disciples at this moment. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand what he meant, and were afraid to ask him about it. Of course, Peter had been reproached quite heavily when he rebuked Jesus the first time. But notice what follows immediately after this second prediction of the suffering of Jesus. In verse 33 we read, "They came then to Capernaum. When he was in the house," that is, when he was home, "he asked them, 'What were you arguing about on the road?' But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest." Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "If anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all." And he illustrates that thought by taking a little child and having him standing among them. Taking him into his arms, he said to the disciples, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. Whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent him." The concept of suffering for the sake of redemption was the almost opposite of the ambition to become the highest, the greatest, the most important, the most powerful that you found at the disciples, which you may find in us today. This is what the disciples had to unlearn. They had to become completely new people. They had to become like newborn babies, like infants, like small children. So when they are sent out to the world, they come as servants, as children, because in those days, as in many cultures, the children are here to serve. You have to become a child in order to be sent by Jesus as a missionary, as his representative. So the little ones here are not only in a simple sense the children. It is the disciples of Jesus as genuine children, as those who have been born anew, who have become servants. Because the greatest in the kingdom of God is the one who serves, which means that God himself, who must be the greatest, is by nature a servant. And so is Jesus. And everyone who receives the representatives of Jesus as small children, anyone who does that, he or she receives Jesus and receives the Father who sent him. Thank you for listening to this tidbit. We cannot cover every detail of these wonderful chapters in the Gospel of Mark, but we will continue as we read on, and you're welcome to return to our next tidbit from this Gospel.